just wanted to talk about one of the issues when it comes to the post October 7th investigation. And that is now the attempt for there to be a commission of inquiry. You have people on the right that don't want there to be anything having to do with the Supreme Court, which makes sense given the judicial reform and the history that existed before October 7th. Then you also have people on the left and people who were formerly of the right and lost children or have had a difference of opinion post October 7th that do not trust the Netanyahu government when it comes to an investigation. The argument is that the people who are responsible cannot investigate themselves. And I have to be honest here, I actually see all sides. I understand why, if you lost a child on October 7th and Benjamin Netanyahu was the prime minister, that you don't want to have a Netanyahu led coalition in charge of the investigation. That makes complete and total sense. I also understand if you are a Netanyahu supporter or Benjamin Netanyahu himself, how you would not want something involving leftist judicial activism to potentially be involved in the uh, decisions or outcomes from such an inquiry. It's important that we just actually remove the politics from the situation. I think, first of all, the families of the fallen soldiers, they deserve answers. The people who were kidnapped deserve answers. The families of those who lost their lives at the Nova Festival and the Kibbutzim deserve answers. One of the issues, and this is in the IDF and in the Israeli government, has simply been the lack of issues and the finger pointing. If there's going to be some sort of blanket amnesty, perhaps that's a good idea, because that way you can actually have investigations, whether that's in the army or in the government as well. But there's so much finger pointing, so much politicking that it's very, very difficult to actually get a sense of what's truly going on. Because unfortunately, in the media complex, certainly in Israel, it's important to know that it's very much with us or against us. You're either with the Channel 14 or the other networks. So that's part of the issue. And there's so many very, very nuanced points to talk about that it's hard to really get to every single issue all the time. But I want to go through a few of them here to kind of distill some of the bigger issues. One, Herzi Halevi and Yoav Gallant, the former head of the IDF and the Minister of Defense at the time of October 7th, both had warned in the months preceding to October 7th that the enemies of Israel see the weakness, see the division, everything going on with judicial reform, and that Israel is under increased threat as a result. There's been no indication that either of them actually did anything about that analysis. To me, that's a problem. I think it has to be analyzed why, if they were in charge of defense, they would not have stepped up what they were doing when they make public pronouncements that the threats are more intense or that Israel has to be more ready. Two, when it comes to payments with Qatar, my assumption is that Prime Minister Netanyahu and others did not anticipate that there was such weakness on the southern border. So how did we get to the situation where that's the case? Three, Yossi Cohen, former head of the Mossad, claims that he actually pushed for the Mossad to be in charge of Gaza when after disengagement, and when he took over, I believe 2016, saying that just like the Shin Bet can't go into Iran, they really are not going into Gaza, so it should be in charge. The Mossad should be in charge of that area to look at it, but that was rejected. That needs to be investigated. There's also bigger picture things that have to be addressed in terms of the situation. What were the priorities? How did we get to a situation? How did Israel get to the situation of being so completely surprised and incapable of mounting a proper response on October 7th? And these are all things that have to be addressed, taking the politics out of it without the finger pointing, because there are long-standing assumptions in the defense establishment and also in the political establishment on how you got there. Now, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu was the prime minister for much of the last 2 decades. I think it's fair to ask questions like that. The question is the politicking more important or the truth? And I really do think that the truth has to be more important, regardless of where it falls out. This is not excusing the IDF, the defense establishment, for what they're doing. keep in mind that Ayal Zamir, who's now the head of the IDF, was the head of the Ministry of Defense. So what about the equipment readiness? What about other sorts of readiness when it comes to things that are under the discretion of the Ministry of Defense? These are all questions that have to be unpacked. And as much as it might seem simple looking only at one way or the other, there's plenty of blame to go around. And I really do think that the investigation has to happen. And it's important to really distill on the issues, individual issues, and to continue to hammer them and demand answers. Nothing to do with this politician said this or that politician said that. I think it's very important to actually go issue by issue over several decades and actually investigate exactly how Israel ended up in the situation. Now, as I said before, it might be an amnesty situation, it might not. But at the end of the day, there has to be a very thorough investigation to ensure that the mistakes that happened, as long as there's no criminal negligence, don't happen again. If they're criminal negligence, I believe people should be tried. But on top of it, it's extremely important going forward for the safety and security of Israel that they actually get real answers. That has to be the priority.